For ambitious dads caught between work and home, this is where you find your footing. Here's your host, Jeff Hittner.
Well, hello, and welcome to the Ambitious Dads podcast. I'm your host, Jeff Hittner. After more than 200 conversations with fathers, I realized we're not talking enough. Not about our fears, our ambitions, how our kids are really doing, or how we're holding up in the middle of it all. This podcast is for the dads trying to build something meaningful and be present at home. The ones caring a lot, questioning if they're doing enough, and craving honest conversations without the filters. If that's you, you're not alone. You're in the right place. Let's figure this out together. Well, today we have a wonderful guest, Dominic Hithon. He is a sales executive, a father of two, both a teenager and not quite yet a tween, right? And he comes from a family of Army veterans. So he's got a lot of interesting stories, histories, and life to talk to us about. So welcome, Dominic.
Hey, Jeff, thank you for the time.
Awesome. So why don't we start so first of all, tell us a little bit about your family design.
Yeah, so two beautiful children. I have a 17-year-old daughter. She's about to go to college. She wants to do toxicology, so she wants to do some forensic science. My son, he is 8. He has a little bit on the spectrum, but he's a very intelligent boy. He's just learning at his pace. And right now I'm separated from their mother, so it's just kind of balancing that relationship of being in the home. We were together 10 years in our relationship, and then now managing it as two separate households. So that's kind of where I'm at as far as being a dad.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. And so there's so many challenges that we face as dads, right? So there's the work-life balance, there's having multiple kids as you do, there's staying mentally healthy ourselves. Now you've also got separation, you've got a million things going on. What's the biggest sort of daily challenge that you have as a dad?
I think it's just like I said, there's just the anxiety of kind of not knowing, typically when you see them, the routine, kind of things that they're going in. And, in America, we had 48 school shootings last year. There's bullying. And, when we in the world that I work in, corporate America, I just know some of the unconscious bias that my children will face out there, in this world. I mean, we've got and it's, as a dad, you don't want to be there. You want to be their superhero, and it's just kind of like the Epstein stuff, the stuff as far, especially with the daughter, my whole thing is I want her smart, safe, try to make sure, social media, they're not getting too much access to some of the stuff they're seeing, because some of the stuff is starting to become desensitized as far as what life and death is. And, seeing that, coming from a family, like I said, from a war background, we were always pretty much raised to, understand casualties will happen if you don't know your assignment. So, very much stay in your discipline of how you live. And it's just like raising kids in a generation that's very social. And as far as, social media and all of that, it's just a different, emotional intelligence and awareness that they're not usually privy to. It's like, and I first gave my son a book. He pressed it like a tablet, just he was pressing buttons because he's so used to using devices. So I tried to make sure, like I said, the social media aspect of it and what they're being seen and shown is better for what is in the real world, because it's just like once you kind of get older and see this world, it's not of what you thought it would be. And so, raising kids on that is very much how can I be influential into their life as much as the things that they are used to seeing is going to be influential to them as well.
Are you is it easier or twice as hard having such a big age gap between your kids? Because I feel like my kids are 5 and 8, right? So more or less the trends don't change so much within that 2 or 3 year window between when one is going through. But with your kids, the evolution of social media from when your oldest sort of grew into that and where your youngest is now, does it feel like you're doubly sort of overwhelmed and trying to keep up with what each person needs and what's the right amount of tech and what's the right amount of oversight and all of that stuff?
Yeah, I would say with my daughter, she was able to she didn't have tech young. Like my son, he had tablet and phone, pretty much out of the womb. That's, the first thing is, they're pressing buttons, and it's to the point where he can do more. He'll tell me stuff he'll be like, I want to go to IKEA. And I'll be like, what makes you go to IKEA? He's like, because I saw an ad for it. So I want to see what this is about. So it's very much of his interaction compared to her interaction is very much, she still was kind of in a world where the internet wasn't everything. She went outside, she was able to do things. Like he was born around, like he was 2017, so COVID, he was still a baby at around that time. So him being as socially aware was very different. And I remember talking to a therapist about that, like some of these kids, because of their social interaction is a little bit limited because they're not around as many kids, or they're doing things on a device. It doesn't really allow their minds to be as creative, because it's almost like there's something else telling them what to do and how to act. So it kind of limits them in some ways of their motor skills. It's a development thing. I think that was a big difference. So it's just that steep hill. She's incredibly smart. My daughter's a 4.0, so I think she just was able to kind of get some of that early on. With my son, it's just kind of like taking his time to kind of get him developed, because of how much the world has changed on that part of it. It's a lot more, I think, manual. As a parent, you have to teach them other things, just because people are moving differently as far as how information is being received.
For sure. And so when it comes to like how you're thinking about that, and I mean, this is not, an interview on tech, but my question is, is your daughter kind of the guinea pig to your son? Like, are you
Very much
learning
so.
with her? And yeah, tell me more.
Yeah, it's really that balance of how much AI do I want them to know, because I don't want them to be prepared of what the world has, but I don't also want it to control them to where the machine is more important than their own mind and their own thinking. So it's like that critical thinking aspect of it. I'll make sure my daughter does, when she does her homework or anything like that, I was like, I don't want you using ChatGPT. I was like, because you have to understand, the more you rely on a device, the less you rely on your own critical thinking to understand why is it giving you this answer. My son, he can press to do pretty much anything, so it allows him some simplicity of that. But I'm like, I don't want to cripple them, because you won't always have a device, right? If the power goes out, you need to know how to use a map, right? If you're going to be driving, like my daughter's starting to drive now, like, all right, you have GPS on your phone, but what if you can't get access to that? Look at the streets, know a compass, right? Like I almost have to reverse engineer them into some of the things that, because it's
That
just
we
like,
knew.
the device tells me that. I can just ask Siri. I'm like, but Siri's not always going to be open or up, I was like, what happens when the power goes out? I was like, I got a generator, but I was like, I have to reverse engineer their thinking, because they're always kind of like, well, there's the easy button. I'm like, yes, there is an easy button, but you have to understand, what is that easy button doing for you? Is it hampering you, or is it crippling you to be, because sometimes I had with my son, as far as device time, he would get very, very upset if he didn't have like his tablet or his phone or a video game. He was very much like, he wasn't having it, like boss baby type stuff. Like it was very much like in his world of what they saw was just like, that's kind of how they are. Like, they're just like, they're young humans you have to raise, but they're literally their own independent person. So it's just kind of balancing what they see in their world and how their world is kind of, when they get together as kids, like they're, sometimes, they're 8 years old, all of them have their devices and they're just sitting there right next to each other. I'm like, how about you run around and go play? Like, let's put that down and let's actually go to the park. Like, have that ability to just like expand and kind of be out there and outside. And I think that's the two biggest thing as far as in their age gap. That's the difference.
That makes total sense. I mean, so I bought the Meta glasses, and it's funny. I think I bought it for two reasons. One, because now I can just capture so much video of my family that I never could before. But my boys now, like, they're just constantly asking me questions and then just tell me, Dad, just ask Meta.
Yeah.
So they don't even care about my own intelligence, one way or the
They don't
other.
need your intelligence.
So from a work perspective, so do you, as someone in high up in sales, are you traveling a lot for work, and how does that? Yeah, tell me how that works.
I travel a lot for work.
Yeah.
So yeah, I was just out in Miami. I'll be in New York next week. So I do a lot of trade shows and traveling, just for clients and customers. So I get out to see folks, and for me, like that's just what I came into the world, doing. I sold copy machines, so you were always out and seeing people. So I think the biggest thing about that is you really learn the emotional intelligence of, understanding body language and understanding people, being able to have conversations. And, they're at that age where sometimes I'll push them because, just naturally, I think there's a social interaction that they just haven't had the experience of doing, like understanding different people, understanding different dialects, culture. Like I meet different people from all over the world. So it's very important to me that I try to make sure and sometimes when I was, with their mother, I would bring them on trips so I could, show them, hey, let's go. Let's try to manage the family time because, I'm at a very, in my career, it's very demanding. Like sometimes I've worked on Christmas. I mean, I work in the litigation world of business. So legal doesn't really stop. I mean, there's always somebody who has a need or a challenge. So, it can be a part of of balancing, like you said, that work-life balance, because it's like you have to provide for them. And then it's just like there's 24 hours in a day, so trying to balance your quadrant as well as your own mental health, I think as a father can be a lot, because, between the time that you have to spend with your children, the time you have to spend with your partner, it's just kind of like, and the part you have to spend with working and building something. It can be, I don't know how they did it with where the economy is. Like it's really trying to find that balance, of what, the old generation was able to kind of manage, I think, better than what I think our generation has to try to manage now.
Yeah, I think it probably wasn't as many things. I think
Yeah.
I heard a stat like, the baby boomers, when they would have to manage everything from like finances to healthcare to the house, that might take, a couple hours on a Sunday every week or
Hmm.
two, versus now, like it's like 7 days a week in terms
Yeah.
of
It's
maintaining
not
everything
stop.
that's going on, right? How do your children react? How do you set it up in terms of your trips when you leave? I mean, they're probably accustomed to it at this point since it's been your career for a long time, but how have you sat with it? How do they sit with it? Like, how do you engage on trips with them? All sorts of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I try to, when I do get out, I'll let them know, or if I can't take them, I take them. When we separated, I just make sure I'll video time them. I'll set a FaceTime. My son, and they'll call me and kind of let me know what's going on as far as, as we do as far as the visitation. But I try to, let them know, like, the best thing about it is, you'll get to start seeing the world. I just tell them, hey, this is what I do in life. This is how kind of I manage it. But I let them understand it's just like, this will be part of whatever you want to do. You'll find something, and if you really enjoy it won't feel as if you're working. But I said that's the part of life that you'll have to balance, because you'll be doing something and then you'll have a partner or anybody else. And I try to kind of get them understanding kind of where the dynamic switched with me and their mother, because it's very much hard to manage everyone's expectations if you're not, being communicative with it. And, that's very much, that time that I had, outside of them. That's where I kind of, make sure we try to build at least a strong relationship where they feel like validated in the fact that, I'm not together with your mother, but, I don't love you any different, and it's not anything that you caused. It's just, sometimes people just grow apart.
Well, first, let me ask about, I'm super curious about when you took them on work trips.
Mhm.
And then I'll ask you some more about the other stuff. But how did that play out? Like, if you take them on work trips, do they meet your clients as well? Do you talk more about what you're doing? Like, how does that unfold?
Yeah, no, I pretty much tell them, if I got a conference or if I'm doing like a sales kickoff, I'll, get them to the hotel, so it's like we at least, we got a room. And then I come back to them after I'm doing my work thing. And then, I'll try to balance that time where, like, if I had to go to Orlando, I'm like, all right, I'll take them to Universal Studios, because, hey, at least I have them here. Like, I tell them when dad's in work mode, he's in work mode. And, I have to kind of maintain that balance, because it's just like, I'm not really going to take them to meet clients. I'll, tell clients, hey, I brought my family, and because I think when I first started corporate America, that was kind of frowned upon, and now it's kind of being more accepted, like as far as being able to do that. But, early on, it was kind of like, are you okay doing that? And now I think, after we got through COVID and some of that great resignation, because I think a lot of folks were feeling like, how am I going to balance this family life? And I mean, I think the first time on a Zoom, my son ran through the screen. I was like, shit, like, I was like, oh shit. Because you're like, I'm talking to judges, I'm talking to lawyers, I'm talking to very serious people, but it's like, then that's a humanized moment where it's like, oh, well, I've got kids too, they're out there, and it's just like that started to be kind of the way. But I think naturally it was first of kind of like the whole bring your kid to work day was like, hey, if that's a 1 day thing. And then it was kind of like, well, if I'm working home, my kids are always, if they're not at school or they're sick, they're going to be not too far from me asking questions or asking about their day. So it started to, I think it started to actually humanize conversations. But I think when I first started corporate America, it was very much not something that was, very much accepted. And finding companies who, there's still some companies that, are still kind of in those older ways of how do we balance, that work-life balance.
Awesome. That makes a lot of sense. Talk to me, if you don't mind, a little bit about like separation and managing the kids. And we talked about this before we went live, which is like, 50% of couples with kids are no longer together, and we don't like have enough normalized conversation about like how we manage that, how that's going, like how you've engaged with your kids. Can you talk a little bit about maybe the um maybe how it's sort of balanced out now, but what are some of the things you really focused on to make sure it worked well for your kiddos?
Well, I mean, I'm really been into counseling, you know, I really trying to understand the psychology and the validation part of that. I mean, I really took that time because I think stress is just one of the biggest things I think in a relationship when you have people who are trying to manage their own wants, needs, and then kids get into it. It's just like there's only so much time in the day. You know, there's only so many times in the hours. There's only so many things you can give to everyone to feel that you're giving them the full value of yourself. You know, if you have 100% of yourself and you have to give 60% to work, then you have the other, you know, the 40% you're trying to balance between two kids and then then a wife. It's very much one of those things. It's just like, how can I give my all to everyone and then also manage myself at the same time? So I think it just really, for me, it just kind of took that time of like understanding the why. You know, what things could I have learned at the time that I learn now. I try to make sure I don't, make sure we have boundaries and we just try to be as communicative as possible. But I think you have to have that part in I think life that you're able to separate home and work. And I think that's what COVID kind of did. It's like you have everything and everything at the same time. It just became a lot to just try to, I think as a father, manage that because you need that time to kind of be at the piece of this is what I do here. But if everyone's right here, it's kind of like, it can be overwhelming. And I think that's just kind of where I was just kind of like, I really started, even getting to meditation and things like that to allow myself to really center because I think sometimes you're going 100 miles an hour that everything feels like it's all happening at once. And so it's just like bills, money, family, there's something. And then if you're not handling some issues, then they start to linger and then they start to build. And then, next thing you know, you're exploding. So I really felt like that was important to just kind of be able to be there because when it's all happening, sometimes you don't have that reflection moment to be like, hey, let me take a step back and look like what's going to be best for me in this situation. But sometimes when you're in it and you're dealing with it, you don't have that, I guess, that mindset because it's just like everything is all here at the same time.
First of all, I really applaud you for doing the work and getting therapy, and it sounds like kind of incorporating your whole family in it, which is awesome. And second, I mean, it totally resonates, right? Like, there's so many dads that I speak to where there's this big challenge where it's like I'm one person at work, I'm another person at home, and then oh my God, now all of those things are happening at the same time, and that because so often we feel like two different people. That just adds, there's just a lot more energy that's burnt trying to go back and forth between this one type of human we are and this other type of human that we are. Can you talk to me a little bit more about like what you have found as a way? You talked about meditation or mindfulness. What are some other ways that you've found to sort of shift between dad mode and executive mode and just kind of balance that communicative need that's required in terms of taking care of your family and taking care of yourself?
I think the biggest thing is just limiting the distractions. I mean, I think, we have this whole multitasking thing that really doesn't allow effectiveness. And I just kind of tell them like when I've the doom scrolling and all of that, I really tried to put myself in a discipline to where when I am with my kids, I try to make sure with my phone, anything work-wise, because sometimes I'd be right there all the time, checking emails, doing all of that. And it's like how you can't balance that and then also give them the attention that they're asking at the same time. So when I do have them, I try to make sure I give them that time, that attention, because I think that's what we're in a world that says, hey, multitasking, we want folks to do that, but it's just like, it's not effective. If I'm on a call and I'm running into the laundry and I'm cooking and my kids are playing and then it's all of that, it's just like, and I want to, I'm doing a video call or I'm doing a proposal. It's just like I very much feel like you have to be able to separate those worlds. So I'm really, and I think in that time of not being together I try to make sure that's part of how I manage life. When I'm in work mode, I do that, then I have, try to give myself 90 minutes, chunk my day out to where then I have times for, taking care of health, body. And then it's just like, taking time, checking on my children, just making sure if they do need me, I'm able to have that time to where I can step away and not be interrupted. I think that's the biggest thing I kind of felt, because I felt like everything was happening to where it's just like you never had any moment to not feel like you were multitasking everything. So if you're wearing all the same hats at the same time, one of those hats is going to be better at the other because you may be more skilled in that. But it's just like Malcolm Gladwell says, you spend 10,000 hours to perfect something. Parenting and being in a marriage, that's not something I had the skill to perfect. I was just learning as I'm going. Business is just like I've done it long enough to kind of know it. And I think that's where I've just felt like you've got to balance those silos as yourself as a person. Like you said, you have to, as a dad, you wear the hats hats of a dad, you wear the hat of a protector, you wear the hat of, being, logical as far as in your thinking. Men are naturally just a little more logical. Women are, more emotional as far as their thinking. And you have to balance that. And I think in business, I'm usually fixing something. I deal with people's problems. You can't take that same person and just always try to incorporate that as a dad to, because if I fix everything, they're not going to see the things of what they're learning as far as that. It's just like, then the expectations are there. And I realize it's better to just listen than always try to fix. But it's just like, you have to change those modes. Like in business, I'm there to fix it, find the problem, do it. As a father, I'm there to understand it and speak to it. But I'm not always there to fix it, because if I fix everything, they'll never feel as if they can do it themselves. So I don't want them to ever feel dependent. I want them to feel resilient and being open to and honest with me. But I very much want them to have that ability to be assertive and take on their task as well. So I think that's the balance. And the same thing, I felt like that was with their mother as well.
Yeah, I mean, that's such a big insight, right? Like we spend our whole day solving problems at work, and we come home and it can't be about solving problems. It has to just to be, as you said, like understanding and empathy, and that's quite a transition, right? Like if you're wearing your work hat at home, like it's not gonna work. Is there a transition like ritual that you have personally, or have you developed at all to kind of move from executive mode to dad mode?
Like I pretty much I try to, I listen to a lot of headways. I do a little micro dosing. So I very much try to get in the mode of I want to shut down my mind from business as soon as I can get in dad mode. Because if I continue to think about a deal or a project, then I know my mind is not going to be on them. So I try to make sure I get a 30-minute of just cleansing, chakra alignment, meditation. It's just let me get into a mode where the only thing I want to think about is now the time I get to spend with my child. Because you said, I think the hardest thing is, like you said, dads who work, the work day sometimes feels like the life day, because it's just you're constantly thinking, okay, is this going through? If the contract is going on, how is the client going on? Are my people doing what they're supposed to do? Especially when you're, at the level of management. And it's just kind of I just realized you've got to let people, if you put people in position to succeed, and if you really kind of build them up, then let them do the job. If everyone does their part, then allows that part of building a culture that, you can separate, the things in. And I think sometimes you have to be assertive. Sometimes I'll even tell my CEO, I'll just be like, hey, I'm in dad time, so I'm not going to answer you, texting me right now. So I think, you have to be able to have that time of just letting people know, there's a boundary, not in just your life, but it's just in business. Because I think sometimes people just feel like I can access you 24/7. It's that's not necessarily, I'm not a robot, and I think I think that's in our world. I think sometimes because we have phones, I think the stat is, I think we touch our phone 7,200 times a day. I think there is a dopamine that also can be kind of, it's something that you almost have to take yourself away from it. So I make sure social media, the internet, TV, I just try to make sure that stuff, when I want to get clear, I just keep that stuff around me, because I know how much it influences, if I hear my phone bing, I'm naturally going to look at it. If I hear, but that is where I just feel when I'm with my kids, I try to just silence my phone, give them that time, because I just know how much time I have when I'm doing work or doing something or traveling. So when I do have the time with them, I want to make sure they know that I'm seeing them and not just my phone or something like that. That when they're asking, Dad, it's hold on. I want to make sure I'm not doing that as much. But I think it's hard in our world, especially because it's just you're naturally I have to make sure I'm thinking about their future, even in the present. And it's balancing that out from a mental standpoint and an anxiety standpoint is definitely something that is as a father, I think can be one of the challenging things most.
Yeah, tell me a little bit more about setting the boundary with your CEO, because that's an important conversation to have too. So, was that something you did very formally, or do you do it every now and then, or is it informal? How is it where you're no, these are dad hours, I'm not going to respond?
Yeah, I pretty much have to, because he'll get to the point where it's just he'll tell me, I have some anxiety about things. If we're working on a deal, or he'll ask me something 7 times, and I'm going to give you the same answer I already gave you. I said, if something happens, I'll tell you. But I said, I'm very much not going to respond to everything, because he'll send me 6 question marks. He'll be and I'll be we're fine. Sometimes I'll tell him, I've done this long enough that I know the habits and I know the systems. He's I was just if you put me in position to do something, they pretty much allow me to do it. And I kind of have to like assertively say that. I was just kind of like, I know what you're feeling. I get what you're needing, but very much so like, this is the weekend, or this is, like, we'll respond when it's time to respond, but there's nothing. And my CEO is in India. So that also makes a difference because of the time zone and all of that and everything as far as culture wise. But I try to explain that it's just very much like, I have to have those conversations like, hey, when I'm working, I'm doing work. When I'm not, I'll check it in the morning. Or, I was like, there are actual times that are to me dedicated to work, and there's actual times that are dedicated into business. And, sometimes we'll have things that are late, but then I'll manage my day differently. I feel like one thing I learned about, you have, however you find the hours in the day, you just get them done to where things need to get done. And sometimes that's not going to be always 9 to 5. Sometimes that'll be 8 to, but just like, to me, it's just like what needs to get done gets done. And that to me is basically on me of balancing my time and my mental health, my life balance. And just naturally, I feel like, and I tell them, I said, if you're in the right mind, if you're in the right flow, things will show you that. I said, if you're constantly trying to ask, because I really don't do the micromanaging. So I sometimes have to just tell him, no, I'll just be like, either I'm not going to respond, either I'll just tell him like, that's not what I think. But I just very much try to very much be assertive in saying that when you get to this position, it's very much like, I'm going to do what I need to do because I know it. And I need you to either trust in that or, I'll find something that does. So I just try to be as frank as I can, because I've done it for 18 years to the point where you kind of earn the right to just have different conversations. When you first start your career, you kind of have to do everything just to build that out.
Well, and in that vein, like with your team, I assume you have a bunch of peers or people that work for you directly. Mm-hmm. Do you set a more sort of open communication channel about parenthood and say like, I don't expect you to respond on weekends, or if you have something related to kids, like let me know and it's okay. Like how have you learned from the experience of kind of constantly having to push back on your CEO to how you interact with your team?
Yeah, no, I very much want my team to feel, like you said, I like open communication. Like I said, I tell them, I'm not here to micromanage you. I'm here to build you up, help you do the best of what you do, and then just allow you to do that in your thing. Like I always ask them, how do you manage your family life? I want you to have that balance, because I know that work-life balance, if it's in the right place, you're going to be able to be a lot more highly effective in the work that you do. So I very much want them to, because yes, an overstressed person, overworked person, they're going to show that, they're going to show that when they're speaking to clients. And if they're in these, I was like, I don't ever want you to feel desperate. That's why sometimes it's just like, I tell my CEO, I was like, I don't ever want to come off desperate or needing anything. If I create the law of compensation, if I create the value, it'll work itself out. So I was just like, I told him I read and study very many things about what I do. So I incorporate that into my team and into my culture. So I was just like, if I feel like there's something that he's not doing or something I'm not doing, I try to make sure I find that balance of giving them the information, but also allowing them to feel open to say, hey, this is just where I'm at. Like I want my team to feel energized. I don't want, because overworked, people who are, working that and that culture, it becomes toxic. And I was just like, however you create the culture, it's going to create the reciprocity and how people see you. So I said, if people are feeling validated, they're gonna work hard and they're gonna believe in the vision. I said, so to me, I try to make sure my team feels that, when they're doing something well, I make sure I tell them, hey, I appreciate the work that you're doing. If they need some other coaching, I tell them, hey, this is what I expect, and let's talk through it. But I want them to feel as if when it's work time, they can work, and when they're family time, I want them to make sure they feel that we're humans who are just doing this life experience in the best way I think we all know how. And that's kind of where I try to make sure there's at least some understanding that, hey, we're in this as much as we are together, because we just know, hey, this is part of what we do at life, but it's not our entire lives. So I want them to feel that, I don't want you ever to feel like if you do something wrong, everything's going to explode. And sometimes I think when you have people who are running companies and, they naturally kind of feel things, I was just like, I don't want you ever to feel that way, because the world's not falling in a day or a minute or an hour. There's always some way that anything can be worked out. Take a step back, breathe it, and make sure, like I said, your clarity to me is more important than rushing to do something or feeling overwhelmed, because all of that then starts to, wean itself into mistakes. And I, like I said, I work in a business that is very much, you make one mistake, you have, you lose the client, and you lose the client, then you have a reputation. Like I tell them, negativity travels faster than doing things right. Like I said, when the IT system goes down, nobody gets about the 99% it's up, but they think about the one time when they can't access their email. So it's like, we have to be conscious of how, our expectations are set, because at the, there's still a human part of this, and, we're not robots yet. So I think that's the emotional awareness I try to make sure my team understands, that I want them to feel when I'm working with them.
I love that you said it a couple times. You very much acknowledge that if things aren't great at home, if we don't have good work-life balance, it will affect our work, and it'll negatively affect our work. And I've got a lot of data now coming out of my research, and there's some data that's been out there for a little while too, that very clearly says we are more productive at work when we feel more successful at home, right? And the fact that you also can see that quite directly in the line of work that you're in with clients is a really powerful statement to that. So I really appreciate you sharing that. I wanted to touch a little bit on co-parenting. So tell me a little bit about, like, what is the biggest challenge when it comes to co-parenting, whether or not you're separated now or before? Like, what for you has been sort of the biggest challenge in successfully co-parenting?
It's just, I think it's the balance of, like, you had a relationship with this person, but you're out of the relationship with this person, and then it's like how things I do in my household as compared to how they do with my ex-wife. It's very different, right? So, like, with my son, I'll do different things that he doesn't do with his mother. So it's just kind of like you have that communication of, well, hey, I have them eat this, well, I have them eat that, or like, well, they don't watch this, like, well, I'm okay with them doing that stuff. So you have to balance that of when you co-parent, and I think as a father in a woman, it's very different as far as how they say things. Like, I'm just naturally more analytical. So I'll just kind of say, well, like you said, stats and things that I back up, I say they should do this. She'll be like, well, women kind of want to have that nurture and that feelings and certain things. And I'm like, but I just kind of just like, well, that's not the real world, So I think that's the thing where you kind of balance that resiliency. And I come, like you said, from everything is, to me, like with the military, it's just like, everything in my family was like, everything goes where it's supposed to go. You have to do it this way. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. And sometimes that's hard because I kind of can be kind of rigid on that, but I just kind of make sure I find that balance of saying, okay, let me listen a little bit more than just kind of demand things go my way. So it's very much, I think, in a co-parenting, finding that balance between what I would say would be done and then, what they do with their mother. It's just kind of like, what's going to be most beneficial to them as they grow into this world. And I think that's because I think we're always learning and growing in ourselves. And I think we are very much a product of the things that we saw in our parents. And my parents ended up splitting up. So, I naturally saw kind of how some of the things that I was doing that affected my relationship, that was very much the things that I saw from my mother and father. Sometimes where there was communication or, not being open and just even, shutting down. Like, so I try to be, like I say, after going to counseling and really kind of seeing that, just kind of really played in my mind of what things I could, do better while we were separated, to make sure, the family unit is still feeling as if, hey, we're still family. Your mother is not, who I'm with, but I'm saying it's very much important that you, always feel loved by us. We don't, because I know as a kid, it was kind of like, I was very much felt that, like, hey, there was something that we did that, crossed them to broke up. And, because it definitely changes how, you're used to seeing somebody every day. And now, you don't see them, but maybe once or twice a week. So it's very much where I just try to make sure that they feel that time when I do have them, it doesn't change the dynamic as far as how, like, I feel and care about them.
I really appreciate it. So what I hear you saying is a couple different things. One, it's okay to be kind of having different sort of systems in the different houses, but as long as you're communicating and both kind of know what's going on in both directions. And then two, it's so different than our parents' generation when it comes to separation and divorce, because we know, like, a lot of the pitfalls of our parents' generation are because it was taboo to talk about it. The kids didn't really know. And I don't mean know about why, that they don't need to know why parents are separating, but they need to know that they are still loved. They need to know that we're still getting together. We're doing therapy. We're all working on stuff like that, that we're still a family. So hearing all that, and again, I really feel like that's such that needs to be shouted from the walls. Like, this is how divorce and separation works today versus the way it worked, in our parents' generation, where it was just under the rug, right? And all of the challenges that came with it. So I really appreciate you kind of bringing that out. Anything else you want to share that I didn't ask about being a father and an executive, about anything?
Like you said, I think the biggest thing, like I said, I think you have to, like you said, I think it's important as a man to have these conversations, because I think as a man, you feel naturally that you have to kind of be a superhero to them, right? You have to be able to just tell them, like, sometimes I didn't have everything right. And I try to be as honest and like you said, and vulnerable to that, like, and it just being like as empathetic as you can, because I think we have to balance that masculinity energy with some femininity of being able to be conscious. And I think that's what I really kind of started to understand. Like, you have to put on this suit of some sort, and it's hard as a man to kind of express that in a way that doesn't feel as if you're not being who you are. So I think that's the biggest thing, is be okay and be open of just sharing the challenges, because I think as a man, it's just like it kind of all does kind of fall on you. I mean, and it's just kind of like I've never really had a woman being the one who's like the breadwinner or anything like that. So it's just kind of like me, and my feeling of balancing that is I'm just naturally going to just go and do that, do that stuff. But I also realized you have to be conscious of knowing and understanding the woman part of it, of like, hey, they're here, and they have their mind and their emotions, and it's just like, as a man, sometimes you can be emotionless because of how cutthroat this world is. And so I think it's okay sometimes to just say, I don't always have every answer, everything, I'm learning and growing in, and just show that to your children, because I think as a father, you just naturally want to feel like, hey, I will do everything, and I will need to do everything, but sometimes you just have to say, hey, sometimes I didn't know everything. So, I want them, and I think it's okay to sometimes just say, I'm learning as I'm teaching you at the same time, because I think sometimes as a parent, you feel like they ask you questions as if you know every answer. It's just like, sometimes I read and find things too, or to my daughter. So it's like, I know the things that I've seen in the world, and I just want to make sure what I can do for you is make it so that when you get into your future world, you'll understand kind of the things that I was thinking, and why this was created in my side. But the ultimate goal, like you said, is how can I make this life for you a little less challenging as to the things that I was, growing and learning as it was happening. And I think that's kind of where I think you have to be as just the transparency, I think is important, because, they see it as like, hey, mom and dad, like, sometimes I'm like, I was young too. I didn't just become a dad, I went to school and all of that, they think you just became a parent. Like, they don't realize, at some point you were a child and everything like they were. So it's just like, we're growing and learning at the same time, just at different speeds of it.
100%. I love that. And thank you for being so vulnerable and honest about, we need to share like that we have challenges too. And both with ourselves, with other men, but also with our kids. I have found in particular that when I tell my kids, here are the things I'm working on as a dad, here are the things I'm working on in my personality, that actually makes our bond stronger. It actually makes them think like, oh, wow, like we're learning throughout our whole lives. It doesn't stop, right? It doesn't stop really when you become a dad, right?
Yeah, right. Like school is life. That's what I tell them. I was like, I said, you will not ever not need a book. I said, the moment you start learning, you stop growing. So I always tell them, I was like, you have to continue. I said, because in life, you'll grow. But I said, if you don't continue to grow, you'll see life will leave you. If you want to continue to see life, you have to continue to grow. I was like, any seed is like a soil. You plant it, and that's how it grows. You continue to water it, fill it up. I said, your life in your bucket of self is the same thing. Once time you stop growing in loving self, that's when, somebody can give you what they don't have. And that's why I think in relationships, when you're stressed and you don't have time and you don't feel like seen, that's what I think happens in marriages, right? It's just like, if my cup has been given to work, how can I also then give you the love and the things that I don't feel like I have, because I'm burnt out. I think that was kind of the thing that started happening with COVID. So I try to make sure I take that step back with them to say, give what you have when you can. And it's okay to sometimes just say, I don't have this right now to give, so it's okay to say no. I think you don't have to say yes to everything. So that's the biggest thing.
Awesome. Again, thank you so much, Dominic.
I
really appreciate this conversation, and thanks for being here.
No, thank you. Thank you so much. And I appreciate this for the dads. I look forward to hearing more things.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Ambitious Dads podcast. If you enjoyed this conversation and want more insights on balancing ambition and fatherhood, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss an upcoming episode. Check out the links in the description for our newsletter and more resources to help you live intentionally as a dad. See you in the next episode.